Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about a story that proves even the smartest people on Earth can fall for a get-rich-quick scheme. I'm talking about Sir Isaac Newton, the man who literally wrote the book on gravity, calculus, and the laws of motion. You'd think a guy that brilliant would be immune to financial foolishness, right? Well, think again. Let's rewind to the early 1700s in England. A company called the South Sea Company was the talk of the town. They had an exclusive contract to trade with Spanish South America, and everyone was buzzing about the potential for massive profits. The company's stock price started to climb, and then it skyrocketed. People from all walks of life, from servants to aristocrats, were pouring their life savings into it, desperate not to miss out on what seemed like a sure thing. And among them was our genius, Isaac Newton. Now, Newton was no financial amateur. He was the master of the Royal Mint, and he understood money. Initially, he invested early, and as the stock price soared, he cashed out, doubling his money, and walking away with a tidy profit of £7,000. That's millions in today's money. A smart move. He even told his friends, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." But here's where the story takes a turn. As he watched from the sidelines, the South Sea stock kept climbing to insane heights. His friends who had stayed in were bragging about their incredible paper fortunes. The fear of missing out, what we call FOMO today, started to creep in. The madness of people he had so wisely observed suddenly became irresistible. So what did the great Sir Isaac Newton do? He jumped back in, and he didn't just dip his toes. He went all in, buying back in at a much, much higher price, right near the peak of the frenzy. He let greed and social pressure override his incredible intellect. You can probably guess what happened next. The bubble burst. The stock price crashed spectacularly, plummeting back down to earth faster than a falling apple. Thousands of people were financially ruined, and Isaac Newton, he lost a staggering £20,000. That's a fortune we're talking about, the equivalent of many millions today. It was a devastating blow. So much so that for the rest of his life, he reportedly forbade anyone from even mentioning the words South Sea in his presence. So what's the lesson here? It's a timeless one. No matter how intelligent you are, emotions like greed and the fear of missing out can cloud your judgment. Newton's story is a powerful reminder that when it comes to investing, discipline and a cool head are just as important as intellect. Even a genius can get swept up in the madness of the crowd. What do you think? Have you ever felt that FOMO pressure? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time. So there's Newton. He's back in the market, but he's not just in, he's all in. Imagine the tension. You've put your entire life's work, every gold coin you've saved over decades, into this one company. For a few weeks, he probably felt like a king. On paper, he was richer than he ever dreamed. But here's the thing about bubbles. They don't pop when they run out of money. They pop when they run out of believers. By the late summer of 1720, the air in London started to change. It wasn't that excited buzz anymore. It was a cold, creeping anxiety. The insiders, the guys who actually knew there was no gold in South America, started quietly exiting through the back door. Newton, the man who could track the infinitesimal movement of light, was blind to the massive cracks forming right in front of him. He was stuck in what we now call the sunk cost trap. He had invested too much to admit he was wrong. He wasn't a scientist anymore. He was just a guy praying for a miracle. And then the floor gave way. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a violent, screaming collapse. In September, the South Sea bubble didn't just burst, it disintegrated. The stock price fell like a stone, from £1,000 to 800, then 500, then crashing toward 100 in what felt like the blink of an eye. Newton watched in absolute paralyzed horror. Can you imagine the feeling in his gut? Checking the prices every morning, hoping for a bounce, only to see his life's work evaporating like mist. His equations told him the market should recover, but the market didn't care about his equations. It followed the law of the jungle, not the law of physics. Newton was paralyzed. We'd have all been there. That deer in the headlights feeling when something goes wrong and you just can't move. He had spent his life predicting the orbits of planets that took years to complete, but he was totally unprepared for a financial orbit that crashed in 48 hours. The wealthy families he had tea with last week were suddenly unable to buy bread. The master of the mint was being schooled by a bunch of panicked speculators, and the lesson was costing him everything. In the end, Newton lost about 20,000 pounds. In today's money, that's roughly $4 to $5 million. But honestly, the money wasn't the worst part. For a man like Newton, the intellectual humiliation was the real killer. He was the man who was never wrong. He was the one who solved the problems no one else could. And yet, he had been played like a fiddle by a group of corrupt businessmen. He realized that he could predict where an eclipse would be in 100 years, but he couldn't predict what a panicked mob would do in the next 5 minutes. He retreated into his study, closed the curtains, and literally forbade anyone from ever saying the words South Sea in his presence again. It was a wound that would never heal. Because smartest man on earth had been brought down to reality by the oldest force in nature, human panic. After the dust settled, Newton was a different man. He still had his titles, he still had his laboratory, but that spark of absolute certainty, it was gone. He spent his final years in a sort of dignified silence, but those who knew him said he never truly got over it. Imagine being the man who explained the entire universe to humanity, only to realize you couldn't even explain your own heartbeat when greed took over. But here's where it gets interesting for us. Newton's failure wasn't just a personal tragedy. It became a permanent warning for the rest of history. He inadvertently discovered a new law, not of physics but of human nature. He proved that a high IQ is not a shield against a low temperament. In the world of money, your character is a much more valuable asset than your brain. Think about it. Newton didn't lose his money because he was bad at math. He lost it because he couldn't stand the social pain of seeing the lesser minds get richer than him. That's the ego trap that still claims victims every single day on Wall Street, in crypto markets, and in every get-rich-quick scheme on the internet. We think we're being rational, but when we see the crowd running toward a pile of gold, our prehistoric brains take over and scream, "Don't be left behind." Newton's story tells us that markets aren't efficient machines. They're biological systems driven by adrenaline and fear. When he dove back into that bubble, he wasn't buying shares, he was buying a sense of belonging. And that's a lesson that cost him millions. He showed us that while the laws of gravity are constant, the laws of human emotion are chaotic. He died in 1727, leaving behind a world that understood the stars, but still struggled to understand its own greed. To this day we remember his laws of motion. We remember the apple, but we often forget the silent, broken man in the darkened study who ordered his servants to never speak of the South Sea again. So next time you feel that itch, that burning FOMO when you see everyone else making easy money, just remember Isaac Newton. If the smartest man to ever walk the earth couldn't outsmart a bubble, what makes you think you can? Respect the gravity of greed, because as Newton learned the hard way, the higher the mania, the harder the crash. And gravity, well, gravity always wins.